The Durham night thrummed with the pulse of Black Wall Street, its neon signs casting a vibrant tapestry of indigo and amber across the cobblestone streets. The air was heavy with the smoky scent of Carolina barbecue, the briny tang of the Eno River, and the soulful wail of a saxophone spilling from a jazz club down the block. On the rooftop of Morning Brew, a sleek coffee shop nestled in the heart of the district's historic charm, Amara stood like a flame against the city's glow, her red silk dress clinging to her curves, the fabric whispering against her rich mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks, woven with silver beads, caught the neon's flicker, framing her sharp cheekbones and deep brown eyes that burned with defiance. The saxophone's mournful notes curled around her, blending with the river's distant churn, as she faced the man who'd set her heart ablaze. David. He was too close. His white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a slice of tanned chest that rose with each deliberate breath. His dark brown hair was tousled, kissed by the river breeze, and his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. The jazz riff soared a sultry backdrop to the heat between them. David's hand found her waist, his fingers firm through the silk, pulling her against him. His breath grazed her neck, a mix of bourbon and cedar cologne that sent a shiver down her spine, mingling with the faint sweetgrass scent of her necklace. "I need you, Amara," he murmured, his voice low and rough like the Eno River's current on a stormy night. Her hands pressed against his shoulders, feeling the taut muscle beneath his shirt. The world shrank to the neon flickering across his jaw, the saxophone's wail syncing with her heartbeat, the way his lips hovered inches from hers. When he kissed her, it was a wildfire, fierce, consuming, stealing her breath. His tongue brushed hers, a spark that ignited her veins. Her fingers tightened on his shirt, the silk of her dress sliding against her skin as she arched into him, the river's rhythm pulsing with their own. The jazz hit a crescendo, the neon flashing like a heartbeat, but fear surged in her chest, sharp and cold. She pushed him back, her breath ragged, her eyes blazing with want and doubt. "This ain't my game, David," she whispered, her voice trembling thick with her gullah roots. "I don't play with fire. I can't control." His gaze softened, but his hand stayed warm on her waist, grounding her. "You're not alone in this, Amara." He said her name, a promise on his lips. "Let me prove it." The rooftop faded, the neon dimming as the story rewound to a week earlier, to the moment that sparked this blaze. Amara was no stranger to the weight of truth. At 28, she carried the fire of her gullah ancestors, whose stories of resilience and rebellion echoed in her blood. Raised in a tight-knit community along the Carolina coast, she'd learned to weave sweetgrass baskets before she could write to sing blues, before she could name her pain. Now, as a beloved third-grade teacher at a Durham elementary school, she poured her heart into her students, fighting for their futures in a world that often overlooked them. Her dreadlocks, her sharp tongue, her unapologetic swagger, they were her armor. But beneath it, she hid scars from a love that had burned her raw. Mark, her ex, had promised forever, then sold her out for a payout from a corrupt official she'd challenged, leaving her to question if trust was just another lie. Morning Brew was her sanctuary, a cozy coffee shop in Black Wall Street, where the scent of roasted beans and the hum of jazz offered a temporary escape. The baristas knew her order house. Blend room for cream, and her name called out with warmth that grounded her. Amara moved through the shop with practiced ease, her portfolio case tucked under her arm, her black cotton blouse loose over jeans. Her brown eyes, once bright with hope, now carried a quiet wariness, a secret she buried deep. Mark's betrayal had left her guarded, her heart a fortress she swore no one would breach again. That Saturday morning, she wasn't at Morning Brew, but at a school renovation project. Her hands covered in blue paint as she directed a group of teenagers with a mix of authority and warmth. The project was funded by an anonymous donor, and volunteers bustled around painting walls and building bookshelves. Amara's smile lit up the classroom as she showed a shy student how to roll paint smoothly. She didn't notice the man in the corner. His worn sneakers scuffed his flannel shirt streaked with paint until their eyes met. He laughed, pointing at her forehead. "You got a little something?" he said, gesturing to a smear of blue paint. She grinned, wiping it off, and caught him staring. "You're one to talk," she teased, nodding at his paint-splattered face. "What's your name, Picasso?" "David," he said, extending a hand, his touch firm but gentle. "Just an IT guy, trying to do some good." "Amara," she replied, her gala accent threading through her smile, teasing, but her eyes sharp. "First time volunteering, or you just here for the free lunch?" They laughed and the ice broke. Over lunch, homemade sandwiches she'd packed, they talked about books, education, the way Durham's history pulsed in its streets. He didn't ask about her job, and she didn't ask about his. A relief from the usual interrogations of status and ambition. She shared her dream of expanding community education programs. He told her about his parents' electronics shop, how their hustle shaped him. His stories felt real grounded. And for the first time in years, Amara felt seen not as a teacher, not as a gullah woman fighting stereotypes, but as herself. Days turned to weeks, their paths crossing at morning brew, where they'd share coffee and banter. David's quiet humor, his thoughtful questions chipped away at her walls. But there was a shadow she couldn't shake. The barista manager. Tasha seemed to watch him closely, her eyes flickering with recognition. Amara brushed it off. But Nia Brooks, her best friend and a jazz singer, wasn't so sure. "He's too smooth, girl," Nia warned, her voice sharp over a glass of bourbon. "Ain't nobody that perfect without a secret." Amara ignored her, but the doubt lingered. One rainy Thursday, she arrived at morning brew soaked, laughing as water dripped from her jacket. David, without hesitation, offered his scarf, his fingers brushing hers as he draped it over her shoulders. "You're different, Amara," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Most folks in this city are chasing something money status. You're just real." Her heart raced, the irony of his words cutting deep. If only he knew how hard she fought to be real in a world that doubted her. She leaned closer, her voice low. "Careful. David, flattery might get you in trouble." "Oh, I'm counting on it," he shot back, his smile daring her to step into the fire. The bourbon flowed, the jazz pulsed, and their banter sharpened. One night after too many drinks, they ended up in her apartment. The city lights spilling through the windows, the air heavy with coffee and desire. His hands gripped her waist, her dress pooling on the floor, their kisses a storm of heat and need. The neon flickered outside the jazz, a heartbeat, and for one night, Amara let herself burn. But dawn brought panic. She woke in her bed, David's bare chest rising beside her, a sheet draped low. Oh, hell no, she thought, heart racing. He was trouble, dangerous, trouble the kind that could shatter her career and her heart. She slipped into her clothes, scribbled a note. "Thanks for the fun night. Don't call," and left before he stirred. David woke to an empty bed, the note a sharp jab to his chest. "Thanks for the fun night." 8 words, cold and dismissive. He leaned back, a smirk tugging at his lips, irritation mixing with admiration. Women didn't walk out on David, tech mogul billionaire. But Amara wasn't just any woman. She was a wildfire, and he was hooked. He crumpled the note, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can run, Amara?" he muttered. "Game's just starting." Back at her school, Amara graded papers, her head pounding. Naya leaned against her desk, eyes gleaming. "Girl, you vanished after morning brew last night." "Don't tell me you..." "Nothing happened." Amara cut her off, her voice firm, but her cheeks warmed. Nia raised a brow, unconvinced. Uh-huh. Then why you got that? I just slept with trouble, glow. Amara nearly choked. Shut up, Nia. It was a mistake. Ain't happening again. But trouble had a way of finding her. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. You can't run that easy. Amara, I'm outside your place. David. Her heart skipped a mix of annoyance and thrill. She glanced out the window, picturing him leaning against his beat-up car, that damn smirk on his face. 2 hours he waited, the Durham rain soaking through his shirt. And when she finally pulled up, he was still there, hands in his pockets, eyes glinting like the river under moonlight. What the hell you doing here, David? She asked, stepping out, her voice sharp, but her pulse racing. He stepped closer, his gaze steady, rain dripping from his hair. You left? He said like it was the simplest truth. I don't like losing, Amara. Not when the game's this good. She crossed her arms, her smile teasing, but her eyes wary. This ain't a game I play, David. You're trouble, and I got enough of that. He leaned in, his voice low, a challenge wrapped in velvet. Maybe I'm the kind of trouble you need, the river murmured. The jazz echoed from Black Wall Street, and Amara felt the spark ignite again. She could walk away, keep her fortress intact, but something in his eyes, hunger, curiosity, maybe truth, made her pause. The game was on, and whether she'd win or burn, she was already in too deep. Will Amara play David's game or shut him down? Drop fire in the comments. If you're rooting for her, and hit that subscribe button to join our Soul Stories family. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this red-hot romance. The Savannah night hummed with the low country's rhythm, the air thick with the briny scent of the Savannah River, and the sweet earthy aroma of sweetgrass baskets sold along the cobblestone boardwalk. In a dimly lit blues club on River Street, lanterns cast a golden glow across scarred wooden tables, and the soulful wail of a trumpet wove through the crowd's murmurs. Amara leaned against the bar, her black linen dress clinging to her curves, the silver beads in her dreadlocks catching the light like stars. Her deep brown eyes glinted with a mix of defiance and unease, her fingers tracing the rim of a bourbon glass. The blues pulsed a sultry heartbeat, but her mind was elsewhere, on a neon-lit rooftop in Durham, on a man whose kiss had burned her to the core, David. She'd left him standing in the rain a week ago, his gray-blue eyes daring her to play his game. That night at Morning Brew, under Black Wall Street's neon glow, had been a mistake, a bourbon-fueled blur of heat and want that ended with her sneaking out at dawn, leaving a note to keep him at bay. But David wasn't the kind to back off. He'd waited 2 hours in the Durham downpour, his smirk a challenge, his words a hook. You can't run that easy, Amara. She'd shut him down, determined to keep her walls up, but the spark he'd ignited refused to die. Now in Savannah, visiting her family and chasing a lead on a shady Chentech education fund, she felt his shadow looming closer than the river's tide. The club was alive, locals and tourists swaying to the music, the air heavy with sweat and soul. Amara was here to meet a source who'd hinted at irregularities in Chentech's funding for local schools. But her thoughts kept drifting to David, to the way his hands had felt on her waist, to the danger of letting him in. She sipped her bourbon, the burn grounding her when a familiar voice cut through the trumpet's wail like a spark. Running from me already, Amara. She turned, her heart skipping. David stood there, his white shirt rolled up to the elbows, his dark brown hair tousled by the river breeze, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, a slow, dangerous smile curving his lips. The lantern light caught the sharp angles of his jaw, and the scent of cedar cologne mixed with the club's smoky air, pulling her back to that Durham night. "Damn, David," she said, her voice cool but her pulse racing, her gala accent thick. "You got a tracker on me or what?" He chuckled, sliding onto the bar stool beside her. his knee brushing hers just enough to send a spark through her. "Just luck," he said, his voice low, teasing. "Or maybe it's fate." "Amara." She raised a brow, her smile sharp. "Fate, boy. You sound like a bad romance novel. What you doing in Savannah?" He leaned closer, his gaze never wavering. "Business. And maybe looking for a certain teacher who thinks she can ghost me." Amara laughed, the sound rich with her gullah cadence, but her stomach twisted. She'd come to Savannah to dig into whispers of a Tech fund misused by local officials, and David's presence was a complication she didn't need. Before she could fire back, the band struck up a new song, and Nia Brooks, her best friend, and a jazz singer took the stage, her voice a velvet wave that silenced the crowd. Amara turned to watch, grateful for the distraction, but David's presence was a heat she couldn't ignore. Nia's blues filled the club, her lyrics raw with pain and hope tugging at Amara's scars. She'd trusted Mark once, loved him until he sold her out for a bribe, leaving her to rebuild alone. David was different, sharper, more dangerous, but the risk felt too familiar. She glanced at him, catching his eyes on her, not the stage, his gaze soft but intense, like he saw through her armor. "Dance with me," he said. Standing, his hand extended a challenge wrapped in velvet. Her heart thudded. The last time she'd let him close, she'd lost control. But the blues pulsed, Nia's voice, urging her to feel. And something in David's eyes, hunger maybe, truth, made her take his hand. He pulled her to the dance floor, one hand on her hip, the other guiding her close. Their bodies moved in sync, her dress swaying his fingers firm through the linen. The lanterns cast golden shadows, the trumpets wail syncing with their steps. "Your trouble, David," she murmured, her lips near his ear, the heat of him making her dizzy. He chuckled, his breath grazing her cheek, smelling of bourbon and salt. "And you're a wildfire, Amara. I'm just trying to keep up." The song slowed their movements tighter, and his hand slid lower, resting just above her hip. The world narrowed to the blues, the lanterns, the way his eyes burned into hers. She was ready to lean in, to taste the bourbon on his lips, when a voice sliced through the music like a shard of glass. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Amara froze, turning to see Vanessa Reed leaning against a table, her gold dress glinting her smirk, sharper than a gullah oyster knife. Vanessa Tech's PR director had been at Morning Brew in Durham, her eyes always watching, calculating. Now her gaze raked over Amara, dripping with disdain, before settling on David with a sugary smile. "Didn't peg you for slumming it, David," she said, tossing her hair. "Thought you had better taste." David's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed cold, measured. "Walk away, Vanessa. This ain't your business." Vanessa laughed, stepping closer, her heels clicking. "Oh, it's my business when Tech's CEO gets cozy with a teacher who'd sell him out for a story. Tell him, Amara, how you were. Mark's little side piece begging him to stay while he took the money and ran." The words hit like a slap, dragging up every night Amara had cried over Mark's betrayal, her hands clenched, fury rising. But before she could speak, David stepped between them, his presence a wall. "You don't know a damn thing about her," he said, his voice low, lethal. "Get out, Vanessa. Now." Vanessa's smirk didn't falter, but she backed off, her eyes lingering on Amara. "You'll crash and burn, sweetheart," she said, then sauntered away, her laughter swallowed by the blues. Amara's chest heaved, her breath shallow, the crowd's chatter, the trumpet's wail, the river's distant hum. It all roared in her ears. David turned to her, his hand gentle on her arm. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, But it was a lie. Vanessa's words had ripped open a wound, and worse, they'd planted a seed of doubt. Was David just playing her like Mark had? She pulled away, her voice tight. "I need air," she said, heading for the door. The Savannah night was cool, the cobblestones slick with a sudden drizzle, and she slipped into an alley beside the club. The shadows, thick the rain, a soft patter against her skin. Her hands shook as she leaned against a brick wall, Mark's betrayal echoing. "You were never enough." Footsteps splashed behind her, and she spun, ready to snap. But it was David. His shirt clung to him damp from the rain. His eyes fierce but soft under the glow of a nearby lantern. "Amara," he said, stepping closer, his voice steady. "Don't let her get in your head. She's nothing." "She's right," Amara whispered, her voice breaking her gala accent, thick with pain. "I was nothing to Mark. He played me David and I let him. What if I'm just a fool again? Stop." David closed the distance, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing the rain from her cheeks. The lantern flickered gold, amber gold, casting shadows across his jaw. "You're everything, you hear me? You're fire, Amara. You're the damn tide. And I see you." His words shattered her, and when he kissed her, it was a tidal wave. His lips were hot, urgent tasting of bourbon and rain. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, the brick rough against her back. The rain soaked her dress, her dreadlocks heavy, the water streaming down her skin as she arched into him. His mouth trailed to her jaw, her neck, each kiss a spark, his hands sliding to her waist, fingers digging into the wet linen. The blues pulsed faintly from the club. The rain's patter a heartbeat, the lantern's glow flashing like a storm. His hand grazed her thigh, lifting the hem of her dress, the rain cool against her skin. But he paused, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice a growl, his breath ragged. "Don't," she whispered, her voice, sure, her eyes locked on his. She kissed him again, deeper, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, the world fading to the heat of his touch. The rain's rhythm, the lantern's golden haze. They didn't cross the final line, but the intimacy, the way he held her, the way she burned for him, was a vow, a truth she couldn't deny. But then a flash lit the alley sharp and blinding. Amara pulled back, her heart lurching. Vanessa stood at the alley's mouth. Her phone raised a smirk, twisting her lips. "Smile, Amara," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "This'll look great in the school board's inbox." David stepped forward, his body shielding Amara. "Get the hell out, Vanessa," he said, his voice lethal. Vanessa laughed, but backed off, her heels splashing through the rain, her threat hanging heavy. Amara's pulse raced, fear and fury surging. "She's gonna ruin me," she said, her voice trembling. "My job, my name, everything." David took her hand, his grip firm, grounding. "Let her try," he said, his eyes blazing. "I'm not letting anyone touch you, Amara. Not now, not ever." The rain fell harder. The blues wailed from the club, and Amara felt the storm inside her grow. Vanessa's photo was a weapon, and worse, she'd mentioned Mark. Her ex was out there, a ghost from her past, and now he was tied to Vanessa's game. Her phone buzzed in her purse, and she glanced at the screen, her blood running cold. A text from an unknown number. "You can't run from me, Amara. You're still mine. Mark." She looked at David, his profile sharp against the lantern light, his hand still holding hers. The Savannah River whispered beyond the harbor, and for a moment she felt the pull of something bigger, something worth fighting for. But as the rain soaked through her dress and the blues faded, she knew the battle was just beginning. The Marfa dusk cloaked the desert in a tapestry of amber and indigo, the air sharp with the scent of creosote and the faint smoke of mesquite fires from nearby adobe homes. in a minimalist art gallery nestled in Marfa's eclectic art district. Fairy lights twinkled above raw concrete walls, and the soft strum of a guitar drifted through the crowd. Amara stood by a striking, gala-inspired canvas, its swirls of marsh greens and ocean blues, evoking her low-country roots. Her emerald silk dress caught the light shimmering against her mahogany skin, her dreadlocks adorned with silver beads that gleamed like stars. Her deep brown eyes held a storm of fire and doubt, the guitar's mournful notes a reminder of the blues that had carried her through Savannah's rain-soaked night. Her heart was caught in a rhythm set by a man who refused to let her run. David. A week had passed since that rainy alley in Savannah, since Vanessa Reed's camera flash had threatened to torch Amara's career, since Mark's chilling text, "You're still mine," had ripped open old wounds. That night, under the golden glow of lanterns, David's lips had burned away. Her doubts, his vow to protect her, a lifeline, but Vanessa's photo and Mark's shadow had shaken her, and she'd fled the blues club determined to keep her distance. Now in Marfa, chasing a lead on Chen Tech's questionable education fund, she felt David's presence like the desert wind, unseen but relentless. The memory of his hands, his voice calling her fire, lingered like rain on her skin. But trust was a gamble she wasn't sure she could make. The gallery buzzed with artists, philanthropists, and Marfa's bohemian elite, their chatter mingling with the clink of wine glasses. Amara was here to uncover dirt on Chen Tech's involvement in a funding scandal that shortchanged local schools, but her focus faltered. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had warned her over the phone. "Girl, David's got you shook, but you gotta decide if he's worth the risk. Don't let Mark's ghost win." Amara sipped her mezcal, the smoky bite grounding her, when a familiar voice slid through the guitar's strum like a spark. "Still running." Amara. She turned, her heart lurching. David stood there, his charcoal blazer open, his white shirt clinging to his frame, the faint stubble on his jaw catching the fairy lights. His gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, a slow, dangerous smile curving his lips. The scent of cedar cologne and desert air followed him, pulling her back to that Savannah alley, to the rain and the fire. "Damn David," she said, her voice cool but her pulse racing, her gala accent threading through. "You got a sixth sense for finding me, or are you just stalking now?" He chuckled, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned against the wall. "Call it instinct," he said, his voice low, teasing. "Or maybe I can't stay away from a woman who leaves me in the rain." Her smile was sharp, but her stomach fluttered. "Takes more than a pretty face to keep up with me, David. What you doing in Marfa?" He sipped his whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. "Business, and maybe looking for a certain teacher who thinks she can outrun me." Amara laughed, the sound rich and unapologetic, but her nerves hummed. She'd come to Marfa to dig deeper into Chen Tech's funding scandal, and David's presence was a complication she didn't need. Before she could fire back, the gallery's host announced an art auction, and the crowd shifted toward the stage. David extended his hand, a challenge in his eyes. "Join me," he said. Not a question, but a dare. She hesitated, the guitar's mournful strum tugging at her. The last time she'd let him close, she'd nearly lost herself. But his hand was warm, his smile daring her to step into the fire, and she took it, letting him lead her to a table near the stage. The auction began, paintings and sculptures fetching high bids, but Amara's focus was on David. His easy confidence, the way his fingers brushed hers, the heat in his gaze. She teased him about his boring blazer. He countered with her relentless passion for her kids, their banter, a dance as sharp as the blues. The auctioneer presented the gala canvas, its vibrant swirls evoking the low country's tides. Amara's breath caught memories of her grandmother's sweetgrass baskets flooding back. The bidding started at $10,000, and she watched her heart heavy, knowing she couldn't afford it. Then David raised his paddle, his voice cutting through the room. 50,000! The crowd gasped, heads turning. Amara's eyes widened, her voice low. "What the hell you doing, David?" He leaned in his breath, grazing her ear, smelling of whiskey and creosote. "Buying a piece of your world, Amara." The gavel fell, the painting his, and the crowd applauded, but Amara's chest tightened. Was this a gesture or a power play? Before she could decide, a voice shattered the moment like glass. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Her blood ran cold. Mark stood at the gallery's entrance, his denim jacket rumpled his eyes, bloodshot and wild. The room stilled, the guitar faltering. He locked onto Amara, his voice slurring but venomous. "There you are! You damn failure!" he shouted, staggering forward. "Think you can run off with some rich boy and forget me? You're nothing, Amara. Nothing." Her heart pounded, shame and fury warring inside her. The crowd stared, their whispers a knife in her chest. Mark's betrayal, his lies, his greed, flooded back, and she opened her mouth to speak, but David was faster, stepping between them, his body a shield. "You don't get to talk to her like that," he said, his voice low, lethal. "Not now. Not ever." Mark sneered, swaying. "Oh, you her knight now. She's a nobody, man. Couldn't keep me." David's fist connected with Mark's jaw, a sharp crack that sent him sprawling to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but David didn't flinch, his eyes blazing. "She's everything you'll never be," he said, his voice steady, ringing with truth. He turned to Amara, his arm around her. "You're with me, Amara. Always." The room buzzed, but Amara barely heard it. Her chest heaved, tears burning not from sadness, but from the weight of David's words, the way he saw her when she couldn't see herself. Security dragged Mark out, his curses fading, but the damage was done. The stares, the whispers, they cut deep, and her legs trembled. "I can't do this," she said, pulling away, her voice raw. She fled through a side door out into the Marfa night, the desert air cool against her skin. The Chihuahuan desert stretched wide, stars glittering above, and Amara sank onto a sandy knoll, her dress pooling around her. The fairy lights of the gallery distant. Mark's words. "You're nothing," clawed at her, mingling with Vanessa's threats, her own fears. She'd fought to be more than her past, to carry her gala pride. But what if she was just a fool falling for another man who'd burn her? The sand was soft beneath her, the creosote scent grounding, but her heart raced, lost in the storm. Footsteps crunched on the path, and she looked up to see David, his blazer gone, his shirt untucked, his face etched with worry. "Amara," he said, kneeling beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm here. You don't have to face this alone." She shook her head, her voice raw, her gala accent thick. "He's right, David. I was nothing to him. I gave him everything, and he broke me." "What if I'm just setting myself up to crash again? You're everything," David said, cutting her off, his voice fierce. He pulled her to her feet, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. The starlight filtered through the mesquites, silver light dancing across her skin, her dreadlocks gleaming like a crown. "You're fire, Amara. You're the damn tide, and I'm not letting you doubt that." He kissed her hard and desperate, his lips claiming hers under the desert sky. The air was crisp, scented with creosote and earth. The distant guitar, a soft hum as their breaths synced. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her against him, the silk of her dress rustling as she arched into him. The kiss softened his mouth, trailing to her neck, her collarbone each touch a vow. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, feeling the heat through his shirt. And when he eased her down to the sand, the cool grains pressed against her back. The world spun, the starlight bathed them cool and silver, as his hands roamed her sides, tracing the curve of her ribs. Her dress slid up, exposing her thigh, and his fingers grazed her skin, sending a shiver through her. The rustle of mesquites, the distant howl of a coyote, the thud of their hearts. It was a symphony, slow and deliberate. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice rough, his lips hovering over hers. "Don't," she said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. She pulled him closer, their bodies molding together, the sand soft beneath her. His kiss was a promise, his touch, a fire that chased away her ghosts. They didn't cross the final line, not here, not yet, but the intimacy. The way he held her like she was his world was enough to make her feel alive. But as they lay there, catching their breath, her phone buzzed in her purse, a sharp intrusion. She pulled it out, her heart sinking. An email from an unknown address with a grainy video, her and Mark outside a Durham bar months ago. Her voice distorted to sound like she was pleading. The caption read, "She's playing you, David. She's still his." Her blood ran cold. Vanessa. It had to be. And worse, a woman's silhouette appeared on the path, sharp against the gallery's lights. "David, Lila," Chen called, her voice, cold, commanding. "We need to talk about her." David helped Amara up, his hand firm in hers, but his eyes flickered with doubt. "What's this about, Mother?" he asked, his voice tight. Lila stepped closer, her gaze cutting to Amara. "Your teacher's got secrets," she said, holding up her phone, the same video glowing. "You sure she's worth your empire?" Amara's heart pounded, fear and anger surging. Vanessa's game was escalating. Mark's shadow loomed, and now Lila was drawing a line. She looked at David, his face torn between trust and uncertainty, and felt the desert air grow heavy. The mesquites whispered. The stars watched, and in that moment, she knew the storm was far from over. The Kansas City night pulsed with the glow of neon. The Missouri River reflecting a mosaic of crimson and gold from the bustling 18th and Vine district. In a jazz club tucked among historic brick facades, the air was thick with the smoky scent of barbecue ribs, the faint tang of river mist drifting through open windows, and the sultry wail of a saxophone weaving through the crowd. Amara leaned against a high-top table, her navy silk dress shimmering under the club's dim lights, the fabric hugging her curves. Her dreadlocks, woven with silver beads, caught the glow of neon signs, and her deep brown eyes burned with a mix of determination and doubt. The saxophone's notes curled around her, a reminder of the blues that had carried her through Durham and Savannah. But tonight, her heart was caught in a new rhythm, one sparked by a man who'd fought for her under Marfa's starry sky. David. 3 days had passed since that night in the Marfa desert, since Mark's venomous words had torn open old wounds, since David's fist had sent him sprawling, and since Lila Chen's cold accusation backed by Vanessa Reed's doctored video had planted doubt in David's eyes. That starry moment on the sandy knoll where David's kiss had chased away Amara's ghosts had been shattered by the grainy footage of her and Mark twisted to make her look like a liar. Lila's voice still echoed. "You sure she's worth your empire?" Amara had fled Marfa, leaving her sweetgrass necklace on David's hotel bed, determined to uncover the truth behind Vanessa's schemes. But David wasn't the kind to let her go. He'd followed her to Kansas City, where she was chasing a lead on Chentech's education fund scandal, now tangled with Vanessa Mark and a deeper conspiracy. The jazz club pulsed with life. Kansas City's urban elite musicians, entrepreneurs and activists swaying to the music. Amara was here to meet Jada Reed, Vanessa's younger sister and an assistant at her Durham school, who'd hinted at evidence that could expose Vanessa's lies. But her mind kept drifting to David, to the way his hands had felt on her skin in the desert, his vow to stand by her, and the flicker of doubt in his eyes when he saw that video. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had called earlier, her voice sharp. "Girl, David's fighting for you, but you gotta decide if you're fighting for him." Don't let Mark's ghost win. Amara sipped her espresso martini, the bitter kick grounding her when a familiar voice cut through the saxophone's wail like a spark. Still trying to outrun me? Amara. She turned, her heart lurching. David stood there, his black shirt open at the collar, his dark brown hair tousled, his gray-blue eyes locking onto hers with a mix of regret and resolve. The neon signs outside cast a red glow across his sharp jaw, and the scent of cedar cologne mingled with the club's smoky air, pulling her back to that Marfa night. "Damn, David," she said, her voice cool, but her pulse racing, her gala accent thick. "You got a knack for showing up where you ain't invited," he chuckled, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned against the table. "Maybe I'm just drawn to trouble," he said, his voice low, teasing. "Or maybe I owe you an apology for letting that video get in my head." Her eyes narrowed, but her heart softened at the sincerity in his gaze. "You think sorry fixes it, David? You looked at me like I was still Mark's." He flinched, his jaw tightening, but his voice stayed steady. "I was wrong, Amara. I've got scars of my own. A woman who used me, sold my company's secrets for a payday, and a best friend who turned on me for the same reason. But you're not them. You're real, and I'm not letting you go." Her chest tightened, torn between anger and the pull of his words. The saxophone wailed its notes, a slow, mournful pulse, and for a moment she saw the man who'd fought for her in Marfa, who'd bid on a gala canvas just to touch her world. But before she could respond, Jada slipped through the crowd, her eyes wide with urgency. "Amara?" she whispered, glancing nervously at David. "I got something you need to see." Jada handed her a USB drive, her voice low. "Emails. Vanessa's been working with your ex, Mark, to sabotage Chen Tech's education fund. She faked that video to break you two. I'm sorry I helped her at first, but I'm done being her pawn." Amara's heart raced, her fingers tightening around the drive. "Why now, Jada?" she asked, her voice steady but searching. "Why help me?" Jada swallowed, her hands twisting. "Because you're fighting for something real. Vanessa's jealous of your strength, your heart. I want out, Amara. I want to be free to build something real for kids like yours." David's hand brushed Amara's, a silent anchor. "Thank you, Jada," he said, his voice firm. "If Vanessa's got more coming, we'll handle it." Jada nodded, slipping back into the crowd, leaving Amara reeling. The USB drive burned in her hand, proof that Vanessa and Mark were a hurricane, and David was their target as much as she was. She looked at him, his eyes pleading, and felt the fortress of her past loosen. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand, his grip warm and sure. "Let's talk somewhere private." He led her through the club, out a side door to a rooftop overlooking the Missouri River. The city lights sparkled, the air warm with river mist, and the faint scent of barbecue smoke from nearby joints. A string of fairy lights draped along the railing, casting a soft red glow. David closed the door, the saxophone's wail fading to a distant pulse, and turned to her, his eyes burning. "I don't deserve you, Amara," he said, his voice low, raw. "But I'm asking for a chance to make this right." Her throat tightened, emotions swirling. Fear. "Want hope?" She stepped closer, the silk of her dress brushing his shirt. "You hurt me, David," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "But I'm here. Don't make me regret it." He didn't answer with words. He kissed her slow and searing his lips, tasting of whiskey and salt. The fairy lights flickered their red glow, dancing across her skin, her dreadlocks glinting as she tilted her head, deepening the kiss. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her against him, the silk falling open to reveal the curve of her collarbone. Her fingers traced his chest, feeling the heat through his shirt, and when he lifted her onto a cushioned bench, the wood creaked under her weight. The river's hum sparkled below the saxophone's rhythm, syncing with their breaths. The barbecue smoke, a soft undercurrent. His mouth trailed to her neck, her pulse jumping under his lips, and his hands roamed her sides, slipping under her dress to graze her skin. The touch was electric, her body arching into him, the silk sliding off her shoulders. The city's hum faded, replaced by the soft rustle of fabric. The fairy light's warmth, the way his fingers dug into her hips. "You're my truth, Amara." He whispered, his voice a growl, his lips brushing her ear, the scent of coffee and river mist wrapping around them. She pulled him closer, her hands tangling in his hair, her breath hitching. "Prove it," she said, her voice steady, a challenge and a plea. They didn't cross the final line, but the intimacy, the way his touch claimed her, the way her body responded, was a vow, a spark that burned brighter than Kansas City's skyline. The fairy lights glowed. The saxophone sang, and for a moment, Amara felt whole. But the storm wasn't over. As they caught their breath, a sharp voice cut through the night. David Lila Chen stood at the rooftop door, her tailored coat stark against the city lights, her eyes cold as she glared at Amara. "This ends now," she said, her voice icy. "She's a liability. I've seen the video, and I won't let her drag our name through the mud." David stood his arm around Amara, his voice lethal. "She's not a liability. Mother, she's my choice. Back off." Lila's gaze shifted to Amara, her lips pursing. "You think you can play in our world, Miss Amara? I'll ruin you before you ruin him." Amara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her voice steady, her gala accent sharp. "I don't play Mrs. Chen. I fight, and I ain't afraid of you." Lila's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Amara's phone buzzed a new message, lighting the screen. From Malik Turner, her colleague. "Vanessa's spreading lies about you at the school. She says you're using David for funding. Watch your back." Her stomach twisted, the weight of Vanessa's schemes. Mark's threats and Lila's disdain crashing over her. She looked at David, his face torn between fury and fear, and felt the river's pulse grow heavy. The barbecue-scented air thickened. The saxophone wailed, and Amara knew the battle was far from won. The Kansas City night blazed with the glow of 1,000 lights. The Missouri River shimmering with reflections of neon from the towering skyline. Inside the grand ballroom of the Chen Lux Hotel, chandeliers cast prisms of light across polished oak floors, the air heavy with the scent of magnolia champagne and the faint hum of a jazz quartet's saxophone. Amara stood at the edge of the gala, her gold silk gown shimmering like molten sunlight against her mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks, woven with silver beads, caught the chandelier's glow, and her deep brown eyes burned with a fierce resolve. The jazz pulsed a sultry heartbeat, but her heart was a wildfire, fueled by the truth she was about to unleash. David. A week had passed since that rooftop in Kansas City, since Jada Reed's USB drive had exposed Vanessa's lies, since David's kiss had burned away Amara's doubts, and since Lila Chen's icy threat. "I'll ruin you," had drawn a line in the sand. That night under the fairy lights, David had vowed to fight for her, but Vanessa's schemes, Mark's shadow and Lila's disdain had tightened the noose. Amara had spent days digging the USB drive, revealing emails that tied Vanessa to Mark and a rival tech firm plotting to sabotage Chen Tech's education fund. Tonight at the gala, she'd expose the truth, risking her career, her heart and her place in David's world. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had texted earlier, her voice sharp. "Girl, you're a damn queen. Burn it down, but don't let them dim your light." The ballroom buzzed with Kansas City's elite tech moguls, educators and influencers sipping champagne, their laughter mingling with the jazz. Amara clutched a flash drive in her purse, her plan set, She'd convinced the gala's tech team to play a video exposing Vanessa's emails during a break. Her nerves hummed the weight of her past, Mark's betrayal, her fear of trust, clashing with the fire David had ignited. She scanned the crowd, spotting David near the stage, his black tuxedo tailored to perfection, his dark brown hair swept back, his gray-blue eyes finding hers across the room. His smile, soft but fierce, sent a spark through her. But before she could move, a cold voice slithered through the music. "Look at you playing Princess Vanessa Reed," said her silver gown, glinting her smirk sharp as a blade. "You think you can waltz in here and take David? You're out of your league." Amara's jaw tightened, her gala accent sharp. "I ain't here to play Vanessa. I'm here to end you." Vanessa laughed, stepping closer, her perfume sharp with citrus. "Keep dreaming that video you think you have. It's nothing compared to what I've got on you." Mark's ready to spill, and when he does, David'll see you for the fraud you are. Amara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her voice steady. "You're grasping Vanessa, and you're about to fall." The jazz quartet paused, and the gala's host took the mic, announcing a special presentation. Amara's pulse raced as the lights dimmed, the massive screen flickering to life. The crowd hushed and Vanessa's voice filled the room, smug and sharp. "Amara's nothing. I faked that video, cropped it, dubbed it. She'll crash, and David's mine." The emails flashed next, detailing her plot with Mark, and the rival firm. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by outraged murmurs. Amara stood tall, David's hand finding hers, his grip firm, his eyes blazing with pride. The screen went dark, and the host, visibly shaken, condemned Vanessa's actions, announcing her immediate dismissal from Chen Tech. The crowd erupted in applause, but Amara's eyes locked on Vanessa, her face pale, her silver gown stark against the ballroom's glow. She turned to flee, but a shout cut through the chaos, raw and furious. "Amara!" Mark staggered into the ballroom, his denim jacket soaked with sweat, his eyes wild with liquor and rage. The crowd froze, the saxophone silent. He pointed at her, his voice slurring. "You think you can ruin me? You're mine, Amara, and I'll drag you down with me." Her heart hammered memories of Mark's betrayal, his lies, his greed flooding back. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the night like a gala oyster knife. "I ain't yours, Mark. I never was. I'm Amara, and I'm free." Mark lunged, his fist raised, but David was faster, grabbing his arm and twisting it back. "Touch her, and you're done." David growled, his voice lethal. "Malik Turner." Amara's colleague stepped in, his eyes fierce. "Back off, man," he said, his voice steady, his usual shyness gone. "She's worth more than you'll ever know." Security swarmed, dragging Mark away. His curses swallowed by the jazz quartet's sudden resumption. The crowd cheered, but Amara's legs trembled, the weight of the moment crashing over her. David pulled her into his arms, his breath hot against her hair, his cedar cologne grounding her. "You did it, Amara," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You're unstoppable." The saxophone wailed a triumphant note and the gala roared back to life. Amara clung to David, her face buried in his chest, the chandelier light warm on her skin. She felt the tide shift, the cage of her past shattering. But then, a soft, measured voice called her name, cutting through the music. Ms. Amara Lila Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, her silver hair gleaming, her eyes softer than Amara had ever seen. The jazz faded as Lila stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I judged you, pushed you away because I was afraid. Years ago, I gave up love for duty, for this family's name. I left the man I loved, and I've been alone ever since. I won't let David make that mistake." Amara's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "Mrs. Chen," she whispered the word heavy with unspoken pain. Lila reached for her hand, a tentative gesture, and Amara took it, the crowd blurring around them. James Chen. David's father appeared behind Lila, his face lined with quiet pride. "You're our son's strength," he said, his voice rough. "You've always been enough." The weight of their words, their acceptance, lifted a burden Amara hadn't known she carried. She turned to David, his smile radiant, and felt a new fire bloom inside her. But the night held one more surprise. Malik approached his eyes, sheepish but warm. "Amara," he said, clearing his throat, "I was wrong to push my feelings on you, and I was wrong to work for Vanessa. She blackmailed me into giving her info on you. I'm sorry, I see you now with him. You're where you belong." Amara nodded, her smile soft but genuine. "We're good. Malik. Always will be. Jada." Reed slipped through the crowd, her face bright with relief. "I'm free, Amara," she said, her voice trembling. "Vanessa's gone and I'm done hiding. I'm starting an education program for kids, thanks to you for showing me I can fight." The gala pulsed, the jazz soaring, and Amara felt truly free for the first time. But the night wasn't over. David took her hand, his eyes glinting with a secret. "Come with me," he said, leading her through a side door to a private suite overlooking the Missouri River. The room glowed with candlelight, the air warm with the scent of magnolia and wax, the city's hum a faint echo. David closed the door. His gaze locked on hers, and the world fell away. "You were incredible tonight," he said, stepping closer, his voice a low rumble. He brushed a silver bead from her dreadlocks, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're my fire, Amara." She smiled, her heart racing, and tugged him closer by his tuxedo lapel. "Show me," she said, her voice husky, a challenge. He kissed her, slow at first, his lips soft but insistent, tasting of champagne and salt. The candles flickered their golden light, dancing across her skin as she unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers tracing the warmth of his chest. His hands slid to her waist, lifting her gown, the silk whispering as it fell to the floor. The jazz quartet's saxophone drifted through the window, a sultry backdrop to their breaths. His mouth trailed to her neck, her pulse jumping under his lips, and his fingers grazed her thighs, sending shivers through her. The room spun, the candles casting shadows that moved with them, the magnolia scent mingling with wax. "You're everything," he whispered, his voice rough, his hands firm but reverent. She arched into him, her body alive, her fears melting in the heat of his touch. They didn't cross the final line, not yet. But the intimacy, the way his eyes held hers, was a vow deeper than words. The candles burned low, the jazz faded, and as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Amara felt a peace she'd never known. But as the skyline twinkled outside, David sat up, his expression shifting. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but serious. "There's something I want to show you tomorrow, on the Eno River, back in Durham. It's important." She propped herself on her elbow, her silver beads clicking softly. "What is it, David?" He smiled, a glint of mystery in his eyes. "A surprise," he said, kissing her forehead. "Something to show you what you mean to me." Her heart fluttered, curiosity and hope swirling. The jazz echoed in the distance. The skyline pulsed, and Amara knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The cage was gone. The tide was hers, and with David by her side, she could face anything. The Durham riverfront glowed under a fiery sunset, the Eno River's waves lapping gently against the sandy shore, their rhythm a soft echo of the city's jazz. The air was thick with the briny scent of the river, the sweet perfume of honeysuckle from nearby thickets, and the distant wail of a saxophone drifting from Black Wall Street. Amara stood barefoot on the sand, her white lace gown flowing like a tide, its intricate patterns shimmering against her mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks, adorned with tiny pearl beads, caught the sunset's light, a crown of resilience and pride. Her deep brown eyes sparkled with a joy she'd once thought impossible, her heart a wildfire, finally at peace. Tonight she wasn't just Amara bound by pain or duty. She was free whole, standing on the edge of forever. David. A week had passed since the Kansas City gala, since Amara had exposed Vanessa Reed's lies, faced down Mark's rage, and found peace with Lila and James Chen. That night, under the chandelier's golden glow, she'd shattered the cage of her past, her gala strength carrying her through David's vow. "You're my fire." Amara had anchored her, and his cryptic promise of a surprise on the Eno River had kept her heart racing. She'd driven to this quiet stretch of the river at his request, her sandals dangling from her hand, the sand cool beneath her toes. The sunset painted the sky in coral and gold, and as she walked, the river's tide whispered her name. A call to the future she'd fought for. David stood by the water's edge, his linen shirt unbuttoned, his dark brown hair tousled by the river breeze, his grey-blue eyes locked onto hers, a smile spreading across his face, soft, steady, and full of unspoken love. Behind him, a driftwood arch draped with white cloth swayed gently, its base adorned with woven gala sweetgrass baskets and pearl-studded shells. A single lantern hung from the arch, its golden light flickering like a star. Amara's breath caught her heart stuttering as she realized what this was. "David," she said, her voice trembling, her gala accent threading through. "What you up to now?" He stepped forward, taking her hands, his fingers warm and sure. The sunset cast a halo around him, the river's waves singing as if in blessing. "Amara," he said, his voice low, resonant. "You've turned my world upside down. You're my fire, my tide, my truth. I don't want another day without you by my side." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The crowd there was none. Just the two of them, the river and the sky, but the moment felt eternal. He opened the box, revealing a pearl ring, its luster glowing like the moon. "I saw you that first day in Durham," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "and I knew you were different. You fought for your truth, Amara, and you made me fight for something real. Marry me. Be my forever." Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain but from a joy so fierce it stole her breath. The waves crashed, the lantern flickered, and she laughed, the sound bright and unbroken. "You're making it real hard to say no, David," she said, her voice trembling with love. "Is that a yes?" He asked, his grin boyish, hopeful. She nodded, her voice soft but sure. "Yes, David, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, its cool pearl, a perfect fit, and stood, pulling her into his arms. His lips found hers, the kiss deep and lingering, tasting of salt and honeysuckle. Her hands slid up his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart, and she pressed closer, the lace of her gown whispering against his shirt. The sunset bathed them in gold, the river's song rising, and for a moment the world was theirs alone. The wedding took place a week later on the same Durham riverfront, transformed into a celebration of love and gala heritage. Sweetgrass baskets lined the aisle, their intricate weaves glowing under strings of lanterns. Tables brimmed with red rice, shrimp and grits and okra stew, the air rich with the scents of soul food and river mist. A jazz band played Nia Brooks, leading with a soulful gala spiritual, her voice weaving through the warm night. Amara stood at the altar, her white lace gown a vision of elegance, pearl beads woven into her dreadlocks like a constellation. Her mahogany skin glowed, her brown eyes locked on David, who waited under the driftwood arch, his linen suit sharp and timeless. He looked at her like she was the only star in the sky, his gray-blue eyes shining with devotion. "You're a damn dream," he murmured as she reached him, his voice thick with awe. "You ain't so bad yourself, David," she teased, her smile radiant. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining the pearl ring, catching the lantern light. The ceremony was simple but profound. The river and sky their witnesses. Nia's band played softly, the waves a gentle chorus. Amara's parents, long skeptical, but softened by her joy, sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Layla and James Chen, now reconciled, held hands, Lila's earlier disdain replaced by quiet respect. Malik Turner stood as a groomsman, his smile warm, his earlier feelings for Amara transformed into friendship. Jada Reed, free from Vanessa's shadow, beamed from the crowd. Her new education initiative, a program for Gullah youth, a testament to her courage. The officiant, a Gullah elder, spoke of love as a tide, ever moving, ever enduring. David's vows came first, his voice steady over the waves. "Amara, you're my ocean. I promise to love you, to fight for you, to sail every storm with you. You're my whole world." Amara's voice trembled but held firm. "David, you gave me truth or love I never thought I'd find. I promise to stand by you, to be your fire, your home forever." They exchanged rings, hers the pearl, his a silver band, etched with a wave, and when David kissed her, the crowd erupted, the jazz band soaring into a triumphant melody. Her lips were warm, tasting of honeysuckle and salt, and she clung to him, the world spinning. The waves crashed. The lanterns glowed, and Amara knew this was her harbor, her eternity. But amidst the joy, a shadow lingered. From the riverbank's edge, Mark watched his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He'd returned to Durham, drawn by whispers of Amara's wedding, his heart twisted with regret. He saw her in David's arms, her smile brighter than he'd ever known, and memories flooded him. Nights he'd chosen greed over love, lies he'd spun to break her. Now, with Vanessa disgraced and his life in ruins, he realized too late what he'd lost. He stepped forward, wanting to speak, to beg forgiveness, but Amara's eyes met his, calm and resolute. "I've forgiven you, Mark," she said softly, her voice steady. "But I don't need you anymore." Mark nodded, his throat tight, and turned his boots, sinking into the sand, carrying his regrets into the night. As the reception unfolded, Amara and David danced under the stars, the jazz band's rhythm wrapping around them. His hand rested on her waist, his fingers warm through the lace, and she leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. "You happy?" he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Happier than I ever dreamed," she said, her voice soft, her eyes shining. The crowd faded, the music a heartbeat, and they swayed, bound by a love that had weathered every storm. Later, in a private bungalow overlooking the Eno River, the world was theirs alone. The room glowed with moonlight, its silver beams casting shadows across the walls. Amara stood by the window, her lace gown replaced by an ivory silk slip, its fabric clinging to her curves. The air was warm, scented with river mist and cedar, the distant jazz, a faint echo. David stepped behind her, his hands settling on her hips, his breath hot against her neck. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice a husky whisper. "You're making it real hard to behave." She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest, unbuttoning his shirt with deliberate slowness. "Who said, I want you to behave?" she teased, her eyes locked on his, the moonlight dancing in her gaze. The silk slip shifted under his fingers, the fabric whispering, and she pressed closer, her body molding to his. His lips claimed hers, slow and deep, tasting of champagne and promises. The moonlight flickered, the waves murmured, and his hands roamed her back, tracing her spine, each touch a vow. His lips trailed down her neck, leaving a path of heat, and she arched into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. Amara. He whispered, his voice a mix of need and reverence, and she answered with a kiss that stole his breath, her body alive under his touch. The silk slipped lower, the moonlight soft on her skin, and they moved together, the bungalow a cocoon of warmth and love. It wasn't just passion. It was trust, a bond forged through battles, a love that set her free. A year later, Amara and David lived in a riverside loft in Durham, its walls adorned with gala art, its windows open to the Eno River. Amara led a community education program, her initiatives empowering gala youth, her laughter a melody for students and colleagues alike. David balanced Chen Tech with mornings brewing coffee for her, their evenings spent watching sunsets from their balcony. They had a daughter, Zuri, whose bright eyes mirrored Amara's fire, and they were planning a world cruise, a journey to explore every horizon. But Durham remained their harbor, their home. Amara stood on the riverbank one evening, her pearl ring glinting her dreadlocks loose in the breeze. David slipped an arm around her, his lips brushing her temple. "We did good, didn't we?" she said, her voice soft, the Eno River stretching before them. "Better than good," he said, his smile a promise. "We did forever." She leaned into him, the waves singing, and knew she'd found her true harbor, not in Durham's sands, but in David's heart. She was Amara Chen, a woman who'd fought for her truth, claimed her love, and wove her gala pride into a life that soared. The Durham morning shimmered with the soft light of dawn, the Eno River sparkling like a ribbon of silver under the rising sun. The air was alive with the briny scent of the river, the sweet tang of wild honeysuckle, and the faint hum of a jazz tune drifting from a nearby porch radio. Amara Chen stood on the riverbank, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand, her cotton sundress fluttering in the breeze. Her dreadlocks, now streaked with a few silver strands, were loose, adorned with a single pearl bead that caught the sunlight. Her deep brown eyes, once shadowed by doubt, now glowed with a quiet strength, her heart a steady flame tempered by love. 2 years had passed since her wedding, and today she wasn't just Amara. She was a mother, a leader, a keeper of her gala legacy, standing at the heart of her forever. David stood a few paces away, his linen shirt rolled up to the elbows, his gray-blue eyes soft as he watched their daughter Zuri toddle along the shore. At 3 years old, Zuri was a spark of joy, her tiny dreadlocks bouncing as she chased a crab, her laughter a melody that rivaled the river's song. Amara's chest swelled her love for them both, a tide that never ebbed. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. Battles with Vanessa Reed, Mark's betrayal, Lila Chen's prejudice. But each storm had forged a bond stronger than steel, rooted in trust and truth. The riverbank was alive with preparations for a community festival, a celebration of gala culture that Amara had spearheaded through her education program. Sweetgrass baskets, woven by local artisans, lined the path, their intricate patterns glowing in the morning light. Tables brimmed with red rice crab cakes and okra stew, the air rich with the scents of soul food and river mist. A stage stood ready for Nia Brooks, whose jazz performances had become a cornerstone of the festival, her voice a bridge between past and future. Amara's program had transformed Durham schools, empowering gala youth with classes on their heritage basket, weaving spiritual storytelling while securing funding for new facilities. It was her legacy, a testament to the fire she'd carried through every trial. David knelt beside Zuri, helping her scoop sand into a bucket, his laughter warm and unguarded. He'd changed since their wedding, shedding the weight of his secret empire. Chen Tech still thrived, but he'd delegated leadership to focus on family, on mornings like this. where the world was just him, Amara, and Zuri. His openness had healed the cracks in their trust, each honest moment. A vow renewed. Amara watched them, her heart full, but a flicker of memory stirred Mark's hollow eyes at their wedding. Vanessa's final desperate article that had tried to tarnish her name. Lila's tearful confession. Those shadows were gone, but they'd left her stronger. Her gala pride, a beacon that no storm could dim. Zuri, you build in a castle or a mess. Amara called her voice, teasing her gala accent threading through. Zuri giggled her tiny hands, patting the sand. Castle, mama for us. David looked up, his smile boyish, his eyes glinting with love. She's got your fire, he said, standing and brushing sand from his hands. He crossed to Amara, his arms slipping around her waist, his breath warm against her temple. And your heart. Amara leaned into him, the river's song, a gentle chorus, and your stubbornness. She shot back her grin sharp but soft. Don't think I forgot how you chased me down in the rain. He chuckled, his lips grazing her ear. Best chase of my life. The festival began as the sun climbed higher, the riverbank filling with families, artists, and elders. Nia took the stage, her voice soaring through a gala spiritual that brought tears to Amara's eyes, its notes weaving stories of resilience and hope. Children ran through the sand, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses and the sizzle of fry pans. Amara moved through the crowd, her sundress swaying, greeting neighbors and students with warmth. She paused at a sweetgrass weaving booth, where an elder named Miss Clara taught Zuri to twist the strands, her gnarled hands guiding the child's tiny fingers. You got the gift, little one, Miss Clara said, her voice rich with low-country cadence. Just like your mama. Amara smiled, her throat tight. She's got a lot to learn, Miss Clara. But she's got time. Miss Clara's eyes twinkled. Time and roots. You given her both, child. As the afternoon unfolded, Amara and David joined a storytelling circle where elders shared tales of gala ancestors, tales of rebellion, survival, and love. Zuri sat in Amara's lap, her eyes wide, clutching a tiny sweetgrass basket. David listened, his hand resting on Amara's knee, his presence, a quiet strength. The stories stirred Amara's soul, reminding her of the legacy she carried, the fire she'd passed to Zuri. She glanced at David, his gaze soft, and knew he understood her heritage was their daughter's too, a bridge to the future they'd build together. But the past wasn't entirely gone. As the festival wound down, a familiar figure approached from the riverbank's edge. Mark. His face was gaunt, his clothes worn, his eyes hollow with regret. He'd stayed away since the wedding, but whispers of Amara's festival had drawn him back. He stood at a distance watching her with Zuri, his heart heavy with the weight of his choices. Amara saw him, her breath catching, but she felt no anger, only a calm resolve. She handed Zuri to David and walked toward Mark, her steps steady, her gala pride a shield. Amara, he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. For everything. I was a fool. She studied him, her eyes clear. I forgave you a long time ago. Mark, she said, her voice steady, but I don't need you in my life. I've built something real, something you'll never understand. Go find your own peace. Mark's shoulders slumped, but he nodded, his eyes wet. You're right, he said. You always were. He turned his boots, crunching on the sand, and disappeared into the dusk, carrying his regrets alone. Amara returned to David, who watched her with quiet pride. You okay? He asked, his voice low. Zuri nestled in his arms. Better than okay, she said, her smile soft, but fierce. I'm free. As night fell, the festival ended, but the riverbank remained theirs. The crowd dispersed, leaving Amara, David, and Zuri under the stars. Nia's band played one last tune, a slow jazz melody that wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Amara took Zuri to bed in their riverside loft, tucking her in with a kiss, the pearl bead in her own hair glinting in the moonlight. She returned to the riverbank where David waited, the lantern's glow casting shadows across his face. He pulled her close, his hands settling on her hips, his breath hot against her neck. "You're making it real hard to behave." "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice a husky whisper, the cedar scent of his cologne mingling with the river's mist. Amara turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest, unbuttoning his shirt with deliberate slowness. "Who said I want you to behave?" she teased, her eyes locked on his, the moonlight dancing in her gaze. The cotton of her sundress shifted under his fingers, the fabric whispering, and she pressed closer, her body molding to his. His lips claimed hers, slow and deep, tasting of whiskey and promises. The moonlight flickered, the waves murmured, and his hands roamed her back, tracing her spine, each touch a vow. His lips trailed down her neck, leaving a path of heat, and she arched into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Amara," he whispered, his voice a mix of need and reverence, and she answered with a kiss that stole his breath, her body alive under his touch. The cotton slipped lower, the moonlight soft on her skin, and they moved together. The riverbank, a cocoon of warmth and love. It wasn't just passion, it was trust, a bond forged through battles, a love that set her free. They lay in the sand, the stars above a glittering canopy, the jazz, a faint echo. Amara rested her head on David's chest, his heartbeat steady under her cheek. "We built something good, didn't we?" she said, her voice soft, the Eno River stretching before them. "Better than good," he said, his smile a promise. "We built forever." She traced the pearl ring on her finger, its luster a reminder of their journey. Zuri's laughter, Nia's songs, Jada's courage, Lila's redemption. They were all part of this legacy, woven into the gullah roots that grounded her. Amara Chen was more than a teacher, more than a survivor. She was a keeper of her people's fire, a woman who'd fought for her truth and found a love that burned brighter than any storm. Did Amara and David's love touch your heart? Drop love in the comments if you believe in true love's power, and hit that subscribe button to join our Soul Stories family. Share this journey with friends, and let's keep spreading stories that ignite the soul.